Ferrari secures a podium with Charles Leclerc in Monaco, while Lewis Hamilton finishes fifth. It was a Grand Prix that could have gone better, but also worse. The race report highlights all the challenges linked to the street circuit of the Principality, which does not allow overtaking but demands a lot of strategy to try to make a difference. The prancing horse comes out well from Monte Carlo, although the Monegasque's disappointment from Saturday remains. Ferrari chooses a different strategy. The English driver starts on hard tires, while the Monegasque uses mediums. The initial launch proceeds regularly, but before entering the tunnel, Bortoleto crashes into the barriers to avoid contact with Antonelli. A virtual safety car is deployed and the Italian team stays on track. At the fifth lap, the neutral phase ends and the race resumes. The Ferraris maintain their positions. Charles is very active on the radio, asking for clarifications on the strategies to follow. He wants to know if they will proceed with Plan A or B. It is interesting to observe how McLaren tries to extend with Piastri, who seems to be moving at a more controlled pace. Bazzi via radio suggests sticking to strategy B, awaiting developments. Shortly after, Gasly attempts an overtake on Tsunoda but ends up damaging his front suspension. The Frenchman manages to slowly return to the pits, leaving debris in various parts of the track. The yellow flag is shown again, and the pit lane is temporarily closed before returning to normal. Hamilton is quite critical, pointing out the amount of debris still on the asphalt. Charles continues to question Bazzi. It's unclear whether he should let the Australian go or keep close behind. His engineer recommends maintaining a controlled distance, following Plan B. Meanwhile, Ferrari calls Lewis in, using the traffic jam effect created by Hadjar to slow the pace. The Englishman returns to the track in fifth place. Norris and Piastri also make their pit stops, while Leclerc stays out. Number 16 takes the lead and pushes to the limit. After only 4 laps, however, he is forced to pit. He fits hard tires and receives a minor adjustment on the front to balance the grip offered by the harder compound. By lap 23, Verstappen leads the 2025 Monaco GP. With the Dutchman setting a strong pace, Leclerc is asked to reduce his times to avoid too large a gap in case his rival pits. Hamilton receives the same instruction. The race leaders are now approaching lapped cars, which could either help or hinder them, depending on how they manage it. Leclerc reports the situation via radio during this phase. Leclerc manages to overtake the lapped cars without major issues, although the time lost costs him something against Norris, who regained the lead after Max's stop. The latter, in communication with his team, jokes about the slowness of his pit stop, comparing it to that of a 1972 car, caused by a cautious engine map to avoid failures. The complexity of pit stops in Monaco makes everything more stressful. On lap 39, Alonso retires, parking at Rascasse. Ferrari prepares to call in Leclerc, but immediately backs off as the race continues normally. Hamilton, still in fifth, completes the lapped car phase. The Englishman opens the radio channel and asks Adami for updates, who reassures him that everything is under control for his race. On lap 50, Charles Leclerc makes his second stop to cover a possible undercut from Piastri. Back on track, he finds himself third behind Verstappen, who still needs to stop. Norris also changes tires and the two start closing the gap to the world champion. During this phase, the radio emphasizes lift and coast to keep the car's operating temperature stable. After 5 laps, Hamilton also changes tires and returns to 5th place. Max is now the only one among the leaders who has not yet made the mandatory stop. His Red Bull is surrounded, Norris and Leclerc are closely behind him, Piastri is 10 seconds back, Hamilton much further. The Dutchman is delaying the tire change, but a possible safety car would no longer be favorable. This is because the Dutchman would still lose ground, finishing 4th. Charles Leclerc takes advantage. He is glued to Norris and could try a move, despite the typical difficulties of overtaking in Monte Carlo. Over the radio, he asks if the McLaren driver is managing the race or if he is actually struggling. The team replies he is simply managing. Max postpones his stop until the penultimate lap. The track clears for the pursuers, but the standings do not change. Ferrari secures the podium with Leclerc, who saw victory slip away the previous day. Hamilton finishes 5th, gaining 2 places from the grid. What a wonder Charles Leclerc is! He didn't win, but he thrilled not only the Monte Carlo crowd, but also viewers around the world who witnessed a race full of frustrated emotions and predictable action on a circuit that, under normal circumstances, namely not influenced purely by economic factors, would be challenged by drivers and teams alike. because it is unacceptable for Formula One to race on a track where overtaking is impossible, where those with courage and perhaps even the right car must resign themselves to staying behind whoever is ahead. This does not mean that Charles Leclerc would have won, but in the chaos that unfolded, he might at least have had the chance to try, with his overflowing energy, his risks, and his talent. Today, Ferrari is him. And it is fair to ask, where would Ferrari be this year without Charles Leclerc? The answer is self-evident. The Monegasque driver tried, but Lando Norris was relentless in holding on to the lead, despite Charles Leclerc's pressure that lasted for 28 laps, with Max Verstappen, the early leader, holding up the front-runners while hoping for a safety car that would allow him to make a second pit stop without losing ground. But no safety car appeared, and the Dutchman pitted on the penultimate lap when Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc were right behind him. Then, in the final lap, the British driver pulled away, putting 3.1 seconds between himself and the Ferrari, because the McLaren had reserves to spend under normal conditions. Oscar Piastri finished third and retains the championship lead, but this win significantly boosts Norris's confidence, and he'll approach the upcoming races with a whole new mindset. In truth, Lando Norris won on Saturday, and, unsurprisingly, despite the colorful yet ultimately useless and rushed idea of the 2 mandatory pit stops, the top 4 positions ended up being the same as before the race. In other words, nothing changed compared to the past. Actually, one thing did. Spectators in the stands were completely baffled, faced with complicated and obscure strategies that make no sense to anyone not inside the pit boxes or remote garages analyzing millions of data points. Amid a whirlwind of mostly unintelligible strategies, 4th place went to Max Verstappen, whose Red Bull wasn't particularly impressive this time. Lewis Hamilton finished 5th, 51 seconds behind. Thanks to a careful pit strategy, he managed to overtake the excellent Isaac Hadjar, 6th, while Fernando Alonso lacked pace and eventually retired. Needless to say, his grid penalty severely compromised his race. In any case, Ferrari did well to seize the opportunity offered by a circuit where its inherent weaknesses are less exposed. Charles Leclerc elevated the car's performance, while Lewis Hamilton did what he could, which was little, given the conditions he was in. Now comes Spain, a race eagerly awaited by Ferrari because there is hope that the directive on flexible wings, which everyone uses to be clear, could give them a boost. We'll see. The reality is that this McLaren is strong everywhere and is pulling ahead in the championship. So a direct and risky clash between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris may not be far off, perhaps as early as next Sunday, when Formula One returns to a proper track, after a venue like Monaco, which offers the most exhilarating driving challenge in qualifying, but which then on Sunday becomes an insult to logic, to the show, to technology, and to the immense investments made by some of the world's largest automotive groups. Yet glamour and celebrities, who clearly understood none of it but were there to be seen, make everyone forget, and everything carries on as if nothing happened. Now it's off to Spain next weekend. Updates on the Ferrari car will arrive, and Directive TD018 will come into effect.